Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the February 18th, 2020 Radnor Township School District Curriculum Committee meeting. First on the agenda, introductions and administrative remarks. Mr. Bechtel?
Thank you, Mrs. Solomon. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, the Curriculum Committee will hear from Mrs. Kevgis and Dr. Weidlich regarding a Saturday school program, and also from Mr. Dukevich, who will present information about our kindergarten registration and screening process, and also the district's Title I plan. Additionally, here's a brief update regarding a couple committees that are currently running. The district's homework committee has met twice over the past month to review the Radnor Township School District homework policy. In their first meeting, the committee heard from leading experts in the field about best practices for assigning homework. In the second meeting, the committee reviewed and discussed student survey data and also looked at homework policies from other school districts. The other committee that is currently running is the committee that is examining physical education requirements for athletes. They have also met twice in the past month. During their first meeting, the committee discussed the history of physical education in schools. They examined the Radnor Township School District requirements and course offerings, and they provided feedback on positive aspects of the PE curriculum at the high school as well as areas of improvement. At the second meeting, the committee looked at school code to discern what the state regulations were, and then examined PE offerings and credit requirements from a dozen other high schools, both locally and across the state. A couple upcoming events for your calendar that will occur in the coming weeks are tomorrow, February 19th. Have you had the conversation, how to talk with your kids about substances? This is a program for elementary school students. It will be hosted for the parents of elementary school students. It will be hosted at Radnor Middle School tomorrow evening from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. All parents of elementary school students are welcome to this presentation. On Wednesday, February 26th, we have Gearing Up for Kindergarten, which is open to all prospective kindergarten parents. The event starts at 6:30 p.m. at Ithan Elementary School, and this is open to parents from all three elementary schools. And lastly, on Monday, March 2nd, we have the National Day of Unplugging. Mr. Dukevich has spoke of this previously. I would encourage people to check the Radnor Reader and the district website for additional information. It also is coincidentally Read Across America Day that day, so we are looking forward to people putting down devices and picking up books on March 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Mr. Bechtold, the event that's gearing up for kindergarten, am I not on, Jackie, or something? Okay. Is that just for parents of kids in the district who might have upcoming kindergartners, and it's not for other people in the community who have incoming kindergartners?
So I can answer that question. Historically, it's been open to anyone who wishes to come and learn about the kindergarten readiness process. So in the spirit of past practice, we kept it that way this year. So it was open to anyone who wishes to come. They had to RSVP. We're offering babysitting as part of the presentation. So we're looking forward to that. And I think it's been a program that's been in place now for several years.
Okay, thanks.
All right. That brings us to public comment. Is there any public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the approval of our January 21st meeting minutes. Any comments on the minutes committee? Everybody's good? Okay. The minutes are good as written. And that brings us to the board action items. Mr. Bechtel?
All right, we have a couple board action items that we'd ask the curriculum committee to move forward. The first is a new student club at Radnor High School. This is affectionately named the Golf Club. And the golf club is looking to raise funds for underprivileged inner city students to give them the opportunity to learn how to play golf. And so that is one that we'd ask the curriculum committee to move forward for approval. And then we have two anticipated overnight student trips, one for Watershed and one for our FBLA at the high school.
Okay, any comments, questions, anyone?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Can't tell if this is on or not. Yes.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. I have questions about the field trips, and my questions are that I was looking for a couple of things on this form that were hard to discern, one of which was the venue, city and state of where these folks are going and which students are involved, because I didn't see that on the form. So, for example, if I didn't know what watershed was, I wouldn't know that it's, what, 7th grade students? I think it's just the form that I have some questions about. In looking at it, being able to, if this is something that we're asked to approve, I was just wondering if there's a possibility to look at maybe the form itself. And for the FBLA, I didn't know which students those would be either. I assume they're high school students, but maybe that's something to consider putting on the form going forward.
Okay, so I can certainly speak to those. So the watershed trip is 40 students. There will be 2 teachers and 6 parents going on the trip. And that is to the Paradise Farm Camp in Downingtown. The travel dates are May 14th and 15th. The FBLA trip are for students that are in the Future Business Leaders of America Club. That is a club that was previously approved by the school board. It's a yearly supplemental that's held by Mr. Chip Horner. There are 13 students that will be staying over, and 8 of them that intend to commute. We will have 1 chaperone there, which is Mr. Horner. That is in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and the trip will take place April 6th through the 8th.
So is this an elective at the high school? This is a class of kids taking an elective, or is this a core course? Okay.
It's an extracurricular club. So it's one of the clubs that the board approves as a supplemental in the beginning of the school year. So it's not tied to the FBLA trip is not tied to a specific class.
Okay. I guess what I'm sort of getting at is that I think field trips are fantastic. Experiential learning, I'm all for it, and I think there are probably dozens of field trips out there that we should be taking our students to that we're not. But I brought this up before. I'm just wondering if, and I know it doesn't have to be tomorrow, but reviewing what we are doing with field trips, I worry that we are perhaps doing things that we're doing things because we've always done them, as opposed to necessarily because they still have the same curricular value and are meeting the same standards. And with limited funds and opportunities both on the part of families and the district, I just wonder if at some point in time it might make sense to do a review, a comprehensive review of what field trips we do, what we could be doing, et cetera. Any thoughts on that?
I think that we could certainly do that, specifically for the watershed trip. The Hershey FBLA trip is their state conference. Students had to qualify for this through the regional, and so that would just be the next level of the competition only for students that have actually qualified through the regional FBLA tournament. But we can certainly look at student field trips for students that fall under curriculum purview. That's something that we can look at, and we do have a number of priority projects, but that's something that the curriculum office can look at as we're setting our goals for next year.
Okay. And then just a question about the funding, because it says, well, first of all, for the FBLA, it says that there will be no days of instructional time missed, right? So they're going out for 3 days, 2 nights, but that doesn't mean, that means they'll be missing 0 days of instructional time?
It's the 14th and 15th.
It's Monday,
of May.
Tuesday, Wednesday in April.
It's May 14th and 15th.
No,
So
not
that
on the-
is,
not on the
so
form.
Monday, April 6th, 7th, and 8th falls under spring break. So that's why they're not missing
Okay.
any school.
Thanks, okay. And then the other thing, just in terms of cost, is there truly no cost to the district because transportation is absorbed by whatever contribution the family contribution is making in addition to whatever staff cost there might be for the staff member who's going?
For the watershed trip
Either
specifically?
of them, because they both say there's no cost to the district, I think, or
No,
minimal cost.
The FBLA trip does have a district contribution of $685. There is no district contribution that is listed for watershed, and I would have to look at that.
Okay. sorry for all the questions, but being new to this and just my feelings in general about field trips, it's my hope that we can be doing more field trips that are truly, you know, where there's a really explicit tie to the curriculum and an extension of the learning experience in the classroom, and even that students who typically wouldn't get exposure to a field trip might be some of the very students who need it the most. So just a comprehensive review at some point in time, I've always felt really strongly about.
So I would just say that a comprehensive review is something that either the committee should decide on as a whole, or that really the board should decide if it's going to be a district level goal that takes a lot of time. And I also would say that this month is maybe not the time to pick that argument, because my experience with the watershed teachers is that they're very good about understanding their curriculum. It's been
No,
around for a long time.
I'm not
No, I know, but I think that,
protesting for this month. I'm just
well,
saying
but my
going
point is,
forward.
maybe they're not the ones to pick on. They don't do this every year. They do it the years they think it's valuable for the students. That's a really high-quality program that I think that the district has, you know, received quite a few accolades for. So I think that, you know, at some point we have to trust that they're communicating with the curriculum committee, or with the curriculum department. And I don't know that we need to get into the weeds about every little detail. I do think that it's not a bad idea overall, but I don't think it's something that we as a committee should just be telling them they have to do.
Well,
I think it's something the board
I
should
think
decide.
I think it applies more generally to like all field trips across the district, and I think it is a good idea to see where you could add field trips and take them away if they're not of any value, and not just watershed, because they do
No,
have
agreed.
a good curriculum, but
Agreed.
like all across the board. So I think that is
Yeah.
good.
But
Especially the adding field trips part. I love field trips. So.
right, but there's
Coordinate that, Jesse and I swear to God.
no, but there is a cost associated with field trips. And I mean, the concern with watershed is that's actually something that the parents are coming out of pocket for. So, I mean, because it's actually this program, or this trip specifically, but a lot of them are actually covered by the parents. So I think that that's worth looking at, but I don't think it's something that we as a committee should just be saying you have to go do. I think that setting a district goal rises, to my mind, to the level of a board discussion, and we can recommend it to the board, but I don't think we should be directing the teaching and learning committee group to do that separately without
Now,
the
I
board's
just want to be
approval.
clear, I am in no way, shape, or form picking on Watershed. I picked on Sandy Hill last month, and I'll pick on somebody else again going forward. It's nothing against any particular trip. They could all have great value and be well worth it. I just think that at some point, as a board, we might want to think about examining that. There's a lot of money, time, and energy that's put into field trips, and I just wasn't sure in the first place if when the last time they've been reviewed was. And maybe going forward, we can, you know, reimagine how field trips in 2021, 2022 could look for our students.
Well, I think a lot of them have come about, and it is somewhat what you said. There's a teacher, like, take the watershed teachers. I have not a question of a doubt that this is something they deem worthy. I know the caliber of these people and what they would pick. So I don't feel the need to, you know, cross-examine watershed in any regard. I think a lot of these things come about because you have a teacher who knows something about that area and they see something that they want to expose the kids to. I'm not sure it's something that we want to look at globally. I actually like the sort of organic way it might come about, that a teacher has the interest in and goes forward to apply for it, and it may be somewhat ad hoc. You know, I don't think it should come from top down. I kind of like the idea that I think it bubbles up because the teacher has interest in something. So
Well,
that's
and-
just
and
my
I actually, I
sort
mean,
of
to my
feeling
mind-
on how it might sort of work in the district. you
Well,
know,
and I assume you guys wouldn't bring you could get a request for a field trip, and if you don't think that they have to justify it to you, and if you don't think it meets criteria, you won't bring it to us. And that is part of reviewing, you know, it's a couple years, each program gets a cyclical review, that as part of that, you're including a look at field trips that may be included in the curriculum. And maybe you're not, maybe that's something to add to the curricular cycle review. But I feel like I would like you to guys not to bring us field trips that you don't think are worth it, and I assume you won't.
And that's already happened this year. We've had field trips requests that have not made it to the board because we did not feel that they had added value, so.
And the process is, it's not just a process of district administration. I mean, it's the building, leadership, the building principals. So there's many steps in that process. The building principals, have to look at whether or not it's a valuable trip. What is is there a curricular tie with it or not? These two are great examples because one is, very much tied to what is a club that has a competition tied to it. That is something that we still continue to support and see value in. And the watershed is a direct tie curricular to a classroom program. We can talk whether we want to set a district goal in the future to do like a comprehensive study of all field trips. My gut would be that we'd probably be better to tie it with the curriculum cycle and put it in with when we're looking at certain disciplines, what are the trips that are happening within that discipline, and then take the time to really look at it and dive deeply into it. But we do, everything that goes forward is vetted and is, we as administrative, we support it. Each trip is different. There is things like Sandy Hill, which is a different trip. The Camp Canadensis is a different type of trip than an FBLA trip. And we can certainly set a goal to have further discussions about those if we want in the future as well. So.
I think this was a good conversation even now, so thank you, because it was illuminating even in the few minutes that we spent on it. So again, I just want to be clear, I'm not picking on Watershed. I think I don't want anybody to leave with the impression that I'm picking on anybody. I'm just raising the question about field trips in general, and I've learned a lot in the past few minutes we've been discussing it. So
I
thank you.
appreciate it. Try not to rain on Watershed. That's good.
Don't rain on Watershed's parade. I certainly will not.
Don't
Thank
rain
you.
on the watershed. Did you have a comment, Andrew?
No, I was just echoing, thank you, Amy, for bringing it up. I thought it was
I mean, I think it might be useful, just an ideas for the school board to sort of talk about. I think you're expressing that you would like maybe more field trips, or I guess Jesse was expressing that, but it could be sort of a conversation for the board to have at some point, is that something we want to encourage? I don't know what the sentiment is in the district, is it like really arduous to get a field trip, approval, or do they feel like there's a spirit that, yeah, we would support it if we saw the learning potential to it? So I don't know if there's, interest in a conversation like that at some point.
just a finger in the wind kind of impression from elementary school parents is that there could be more field trips. So, that's just it's a perception. But.
Finger in the wind, I like that.
All right, well, I guess more to come, maybe. Where are we?
Did we approve those? Do you want to approve the
I
board action?
assume so.
Yeah.
Did you not want to move those forward?
Oh, no, I
Yeah,
know.
okay. Yeah, we're going to move those forward. Saturday school proposal, I believe that's where we are.
All right, we will call forward our illustrious middle school and high school principals, Dr. Weidlich and Mrs. Kevgis.
Yeah, that means I'm on. Yeah. But we don't always.
We need a montage of all the times we've said, is this on? Is it off? Is it on?
Oh, what a gentleman. Oh, my goodness.
Did we get that on camera?
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Hello.
Thanks for having us. So Saturday school, something that we have spent a lot of time thinking about. We're always trying to be reflective of our discipline practices and see how we can do things better. Saturday school is something that we looked at throughout the Central League and is present in most schools. So that was something, kind of the place where we started to see if it's, working, where it is in place, and what the structure of other programs are like. One of the things that you'll see in the beginning of the presentation is the current discipline model at Radnor High School, and Dr. Weidlich will talk a little bit about the middle school in a few minutes. We have different levels and fractions from level 1 all the way to level 4, and that can range from something as simple as a teacher detention all the way to an out-of-school suspension. And so there's a broad range of consequences that we can assign to students that, make poor decisions. there is some specifics about what qualifies as a level 2, what qualifies as a level 3, and again, that's really a range of different things. If you take a look at our policy for out-of-school suspensions on the next couple of slides, to summarize, out-of-school suspensions take students out of school, right? I think that's pretty obvious, but it also takes them out of instruction, takes them out of class, and it's a great deal of work that they're missing in that process and a great deal of instruction that they're missing in that process. And for some students that, aren't necessarily academically inclined, it's almost a vacation for them and a reward, and that's not something that we certainly want to encourage by any means. Students are not allowed on the school premise at any point while they're suspended and out of school, and they really can't return to classes until we've had that meeting with an administrator to discuss how we're going to move forward. One of my greatest concerns, if you take a look at the slide number 5, which is the limitations of out-of-school suspension, is that, again, they're missing instruction. They're missing core instruction with their teachers that they really can't get back. They could be potentially seeing it as a reward, but more than that, it doesn't allow us that restorative piece, right? To have that restorative practice between the students that are involved in the incident, which for us, as educators is such a key component. Discipline is wonderful when it's needed, but at the same time, if education doesn't follow from that, then there really isn't a purpose for it, at least in my opinion. There is certainly research that backs up that out-of-school suspensions aren't a good idea, that there's, higher dropout rates, there's lower attendance rates. I'm not sure if that's necessarily something we battle at Radnor, but it is something to be, cognizant of. So that's kind of the impetus of where we started thinking about Saturday school, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Weidlich for a moment.
I always want to say good morning just because I'm so used to that, but good evening. So the middle school, we operate on the model of progressive discipline and restorative practices. And what I mean by progressive discipline is we're not just looking to assign a consequence. So we're looking at an incident and we're trying to kind of help the student understand kind of like what was the why behind his or her choice, how did he or she do that, talk about some prevention and intervention strategies, and really try to make it a learning experience for the student. We take into account the nature of the event, the age and the maturity level of the student, the context, the frequency. So there's a lot of things that we take into account, especially at the middle level, just because there's so many different factors going on in their lives that we want to make sure that we are providing a consequence that is best fit for the offense, but also that's meeting the needs of the student. So students are assigned consequences based on the level of their infraction, again, taking into account that the progressive discipline approach. We mirror the high school, level 1 through level 4. That could be from detentions, whether they're 30-minute, lunch detentions, whether it might be a before school detention, whether it's going to be an after school detention. But we try everything in our power not to remove the student from the academic setting. Unfortunately, sometimes the consequence or the repeated violations, despite the progressive discipline approach, may not be working. And also, depending on the level of infraction, it may charge us to go to an in-school suspension or possibly an out-of-school suspension. So what in-school suspension looks like at the middle level, and it could look very, very different at from our neighboring middle schools. But ISS at Radnor Middle School, what we try to do is we, as administrators, we address a serious violation to the code of conduct. We not only address that with the student, but we address that with the parents or the caregivers, and we do remove the student from the classroom setting for a length of time. The student in ISS attends school, and we stress that to the parents and the caregivers when we're calling home. But unfortunately, they're not permitted to attend class. They have access to the instructional staff and curriculum within the school setting while serving their consequences away from their peers. So we try to have the content area experts check in with them. Would it be their roster teacher? Not necessarily. Could it be me? Possibly. A school counselor who's also a certified teacher? Possibly. But we're trying to keep the door revolving to making sure that they're not missing a beat in terms of being removed from the classroom. that's a challenge sometimes, to be honest with you. Students who are, and I'll get back to that, but students who are assigned ISS, they are not prohibited from attending any activities, or if they're involved in after-school events for that date, that assignment, that ISS assignment, whether as a participant or as a spectator. So going back to what I was saying, there are some limitations to ISS, at least within my building. One is going to be supervision. I know in some high schools they may have a designated in-school suspension teacher. I'm not very familiar, to be very honest with you, a lot of middle schools that have a designated person to be the instructional, the assigned instructional expert. So we do our best, kind of like what I outlined of having teachers rotate through, whether it be for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, or whether it be an administrator or counselor checking in on the student, not only academically, but checking in with them to talk a little bit about, how are you feeling? You understand why you're here, just kind of reinforcing the why behind them being in that room. The consistency of the in-school suspension, the exclusion from the academic setting, and based on the data that we have, and it's very limited and it's very green data right now, is that we're still having repeat offenders. So it doesn't seem to be proving as an effective model this year with. And I have to stress, it is this year in our building specific, so it's very raw, very green data, but it doesn't seem to be working, at least from my lens, within the building. So when the opportunity to come up with different alternatives or solutions to removing kids from the academic setting and working alongside PT, it's something that the middle school wanted to jump at.
So I think you heard a little bit about the background of how we arrived here. The program itself, allows us that in between, between going to in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension. It gives us a different option, which I think is much needed. So it also allows the students to stay in class, not miss instruction, right, which is one of our greatest concerns. And it provides them, we would hope for the program to be very structured, right? An opportunity for them to get their work done, to work with the teacher from the high school or from the middle school to address what their needs were, in terms of their education, but also would allow us for that restorative piece. And that's something, it's not just, okay, let's forgive each other and forget. This really is a structured piece that is really powerful when you see it done. And it's something that our teachers would need to be, given some training on to do it the right way. And if it's done well, it really, like I said, is very powerful moving forward for those students. And so that restorative piece would be taken care of on the Saturday program as well. It also allows us the opportunity to address vaping. And we're all well aware the Attorney General was here last week, and that this is an epidemic in our country, and not just at Radnor High School, but in every high school. They're fighting the same battle, and in many middle schools, as well. Vape Educate is the program that I've looked at. It's something that would allow us to have our students learn about the, dangers of vaping and, other things that it would address. It's relatively inexpensive. It's $640 for 40 licenses. I highly doubt we're going to use, knock on wood, 40 licenses in a year. However, again, it is pretty cost effective. It's an online course. It's used in other high schools in the area. I've reached out to the Central League, and quite a few use them, including Conestoga. My understanding is that it's incredibly thorough, and it's 4 straight hours of education. So at the end of the day, hopefully any student that would go through that would never want to vape again. It allows us a lot of different opportunities in terms of what we can capture with discipline. So I think it has a lot of benefits that we can look at. Dr. Weiler's going to talk a little bit about the logistics now.
So what it will look like at the secondary setting is that Saturday school would run every Saturday, taking into account, that's a kind of a given, but taking into account, the academic calendar, taking into account holidays, different breaks, and things of that nature. So tentatively right now, the first and third Saturdays would be designated for high school. So 2 Saturdays out of the month would be designated for high schools. The other 2 would be designated for the middle school. So the high school, of course, would be hosted at the high school. The middle school days would be hosted at the middle school. And the programs would be slated to run from 8:30 in the morning until 12:30. Do you want to do the last one? Yeah. So the cost proposal. So the cost of a Saturday school monitor would run at the contractual rate of $45 per hour. Like I said, each session would last 4 hours from 8:30 until 12:30. And, excuse me, and based on our calculations, the total cost per month to the district would be approximately $871, plus the cost of the Vape Educate program for the high school.
So just for a quick minute to address the rate at which we would be, putting forward. Again, I think it has to be a teacher, because I think it has to be someone who can address the curriculum, who knows the curriculum, who knows Schoology, right, knows how to go over things with students and really keep it in that structured manner. But also, if we're going to do the restorative piece, it really needs to be a teacher to take care of that. So that was the reasoning behind that. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed that last picture, for those of us that have seen that movie. Jesse, you probably don't know that reference. You do? That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Any questions? Jesse?
Some questions.
Sure.
Would this be like on an incident based, or would you be put on it if you have like a track record? I don't like.
So I think that depends, it goes back to the progressive discipline model. So I think it depends on, so if you've had several different types of like small infractions, but despite the interventions that we're putting into play, whether it's at the high school or whether it's at the middle school, if those, minor consequences are adding up and the behaviors, and that's ultimately the goal of discipline, is to alter the behavior. If that's not changing, then not to say that Saturday detention would be it, but that would probably be something that would be considered. Or it could be if you have a pretty severe infraction that would constitute what in the past would have constituted an ISS, that Saturday, may be a result.
And are you putting it for the whole year, or are you like admitted into or like you're put in the school, and then when like sufficient like rehabilitation has occurred, then you're taken out? Like, how long are you in Saturday school?
I think that has to be done on an individual basis, given, the infraction and the consequences that would follow. I think for vaping, would be a little bit different, because right now we have a program in place where students will work on a cessation program. But I think in lieu of that, because again, it's taking them out of class, that we would take them right to Saturday school for that offense.
So if a student if a student's caught vaping, their consequence would be a Saturday school, and they'd have to participate then in that cessation program.
That
while
is correct.
attending. So it would be an incident that would trigger it, but it could also be a situation where some students could have multiple incidents that now arise to a Saturday. It's no longer an after-school detention.
Yeah. Oh, and what would take a preference? Like, say you're going on a student is going on a trip or something like that, they would have to stay to go to Saturday school. Like, the punishment overrides it.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Talking about a family trip or something
Or a
along those
family
lines?
trip, like prior commitment.
We would work
Like
with the
you
family.
would just work it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
My stomach ache from laughing so hard.
Amy?
Andrew?
Oh, you want to go around?
Want to go to Sarah this time?
No? Why are you shy?
No. Shy? No, that's not my problem. So maybe I missed it, but when do you see this being implemented potentially, for this school year or going into next school year?
Ideally, we'd like to start it now, if we
Okay.
could. Mhm.
Okay. And did I miss that? I don't know if I missed it. Okay. The other thing is, so in other words, it's kind of curious to me that an in-school suspension would take a student away from school. Sort of seems to me like a student whose behavior warrants a suspension probably needs school. So I like this as an alternative so that they are not missing instruction. And So, I guess my question is that, is there some kind of way to measure the effectiveness of this if it were to be put into place relative to some of the other forms of discipline that you've thought about?
I think that's something we can certainly look at. You know, we are always reviewing our discipline rates and looking at, you know, how they all portion out. And I think we could weave that in and see how previous years compare out of school, in school versus, you know, Saturday school, and see how attendance rates are, see how grades look. You know, there's lots of different things that we could look at
Recidivism or
data-wise.
whatever, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So this essentially, in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension, as we know it, might not even exist if, are you almost proposing eliminating those in favor of this, or?
I don't think we can eliminate those because there are certain consequences. I mean, there's certain infractions that just, you have to have an out-of-school suspension, right? But it would certainly be our hope that we would lower the out-of-school suspensions for sure, or in-school suspensions.
Okay. And I guess the only other thing is that would the vaping cessation, maybe it is now, is the vaping cessation program mandatory?
At the high school, it's mandatory to attend, but again, it's during the school day, and so they're missing instruction. Limited, but instruction is instruction.
Okay, and the last thing, you spoke to the piece about the teacher. I mean, that's a lot for a teacher to be able to juggle, is academic remediation, supervising smoking cessation, and doing restorative practice, which to me is something wholly different from supervising academics. Do you
My-
feel confident that that one staff member can be attending to
I
those
do.
3 different
I
missions?
do, and again, I think there has to be training for the restorative piece, but I think that's part of the reason why we want to have a teacher who has that background and really knows, you know, that's the essence of education, being able to multitask, right? And so I think given the right parameters, they'll be fine. My hope is that it's not a huge audience that they're working with, right? And that you have maybe, you know, a few kids and you can give them that individual attention that they really need.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. Sarah, Andrew, anybody?
So I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to start with my questions on the suspension generally, or the Saturday program generally. I guess, are you asking for this as like a permanent thing, or would you consider it as a trial period to make sure we think it's actually effective before we just kind of say this will?
To be honest, I think it would be great to pilot it, you know,
Okay.
for the remainder of the year if we can get it started. And, you know, it's always good to run pilots like that, whether it's, you know, technology we've done and even if it's this, and take a look at the end of the year and say, okay, what do we need to tweak? What can we do better? And then move forward with the full program for the following school year.
Okay. And what's the plan for actually enforcing attendance? I mean, one of my thoughts was, you know, kids have family vacations, but, you know, some people's kids' parents work on weekends. I mean, what's the penalty for failing to show up to Saturday school? I mean,
That's something we'll have to be a little creative with,
Okay.
you know, and we still have to work through.
okay. Do you have a sense of how many kids we're expecting each week in this program? I mean, not that we're looking to fill this class. I mean, I'd be very happy if we have such great discipline.
So, I mean, so, you know, the goal, the goal is not to be like, okay, now we got it, and here you know,
Right,
we don't want
right.
to do, but, you know, I would say that from my experience in middle level, behaviors start to rev up just because you know, the comfort level is there with students, and they're very familiar with their friend, you know what I mean? And some behaviors become a little more inquisitive as to how much they could kind of push the envelope, whether they know it or not. So my experience is that behavior, we do start to see a slow spike in some, I don't say undesirable, but in some challenging behaviors. We do not have a high population of students in ISS, so it's not even
was
to say
going.
that we
Yeah.
would, at least at the middle school, I don't want to speak for the high school, would even need to have the Saturday detention. We just wanted to make sure that we have something set in case we needed it. To say that, you know, let's say we have on our day in March, I don't have anybody assigned to it, then great.
Right,
Do
right.
you know what I mean?
Okay.
But I wouldn't, our ISS rates, we have, if anything, we'd have one student in. We very rarely ever have more than one student in, at least, you know, from my lens this year. So I wouldn't, I would say a handful at best.
In a given month, you have a handful of ISSs, and the idea is to switch them over to a Saturday program?
Not even a handful of ISSs, and we're at the point right now where we're having some students with such minor infractions, but the interventions do not deem an ISS.
Okay.
But the interventions that we're doing within the building, they're not working. Like, we don't have any bridge.
You need an interim step, is what you're saying?
Right.
Okay. So, and that was because one of the concerns I had was, I assume when you give an out-of-school suspension or an in-school suspension, it's the next day. It comes on quickly.
Right.
And I don't want to have them every weekend if we don't need them every weekend, but I feel like you could have a situation where a kid gets this, but the penalty doesn't show up for 2 weeks. And the reality is all of us respond better when the penalty actually is more immediate.
Right.
But that you don't think there aren't enough of these problems that it needs to be more immediate.
Well, I mean, I think that would be the whole
a
purpose of the
challenge.
pilot, right? To see
Okay.
if that's definitely something that we'll throw into some of the questions to reflect upon.
Okay.
It may be that it has to be more immediate. You know, if something takes place on a Monday, like let's say hypothetically yesterday, they're not going to wait for the middle school, which is maybe 2 Saturdays. Would it be better to have that like immediately?
Okay.
But that's something I guess we would vet and reflect on and stuff and report back to you at the end of the year.
I think that's part of the process when you're looking at an individual student, right, and looking at what took place to determine whether or not it's something that can wait, right? And that would probably be the difference between deciding whether it's an OSS and out of school, or if it's something that can be handled by Saturday school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not going to be an automatic, oh, this infraction goes to Saturday school. You just want another arrow in your quiver.
Correct.
Okay. Because one of the concerns I had when I was looking at the level 2 versus level 3 issues was that the level 3 issues, to my mind, can be more of a burden to the other students as well, right? Bullying, fighting, insubordination, which interrupts the classroom, which means other kids aren't learning. And so my concern with saying, well, level 3 is something that might just go to Saturday school, but you're asking us to trust you that you're going to make good decisions, that the rest of the students aren't going to be disrupted.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay. So it was a one-time incident, but we want to make sure we nip it in the bud.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, just because suspensions won't go away. You know,
Okay,
out-of-school
and that was kind of where I
suspensions-
initially
so,
thought
yeah,
this was
so
going.
no,
This is
out-of-school
just an extra.
suspensions won't go away,
Okay.
and there is a time and place to suspend students out of school. An out-of-school suspension creates an opportunity for the family, for the administration to have a conversation that there's some concerning behavior going on. And
Right.
that out-of-school suspension, the reality of the student not coming, helps then generate that opportunity for the discussion. I would argue that in-school suspension does not do that.
Okay.
So in-school suspension, the student just takes the bus to school, everything's the same, and there's no acknowledgement that there's something that's risen to a level here that's a concern. I think Saturdays will give that opportunity to have that more realization that, okay, there's concerning behavior, what are we doing to try to address it, to support it, so we can change the behavior, but suspensions will still happen. My guess will be that we didn't use in-school suspensions at the high school, use it at the middle school, we'll see less in-school suspensions because of this. We're not gonna say that we won't ever do it, but I would think you'll see that go down dramatically, my guess would be. But we will still have, as an arrow in the quiver, and a reality that an out-of-school suspension will still happen.
Okay, and that was just my misunderstanding. I think when I read the materials before the meeting, I thought they're getting rid of, I knew you wouldn't get rid of out of school, but I thought you were trying to get rid of the in-school and move just to Saturday. So I was afraid of the lack of kind of enforcement. So, okay, so then I had a couple more questions. You talked about having a teacher. I think that's great, because I do think the value of a suspension should also be academic. And the problem with out-of-school suspension is there's no academic piece to it often. So I like that piece of this. I guess my question is, do you anticipate this being rotating teachers? Do you have a teacher or two who you think will cover all of it? One from each school. How do you anticipate staffing this? Because especially if part of it is a restorative practice, the question is, are you going to train each of these teachers separately for this? Or if a kid has multiple bouts of Saturday school, is it beneficial to them to have the same teacher that they're coming in front of?
I mean, I think ideally we would have 1 to 2 staff members that are interested, and we have to see where the interest is too.
Okay.
I'm not sure how many people are going to want to give up their Saturdays.
Well, that
right?
was, that occurred to me.
Right, but it also has to be the right fit.
Right.
It has to be someone who's going to be able to be stern when they need to be and nurturing when they need to be and be able to get the job done. And that is a broad scope of things that we're asking them to do. So
Very
it
broad.
really has to be a good fit too.
Okay. Okay, so I appreciate kind of you guys having thought through all this and recognizing that there's just a lot to go into it, but in some ways, it sounds like you have to pilot it to know if it's gonna work. To reiterate Amy's point, I think it would be really important to be able to see the effectiveness, if we wanna implement this longer term, to be able to kind of figure out how you're gonna measure that it's effective. Does it just decrease the ISS rate, or does it actually decrease discipline overall? Are we seeing kids, really respond to this, and is it keeping their academic performance up, or at least making sure it doesn't slip in the situations like this?
And I'm not sure if you'll get great data in a few months.
That's the
I
problem,
think
yeah.
that's something that you have
Might
to
have
really
to do
look
it
at
longer
over
than
a
that.
time
Understood.
period to get a true sample.
Right. No, I understand
So
that.
thinking of it along the lines of the MTSS model that we talked about before, so you have, the different layers of intervention, and this is just something else that we can add in there, to help kids, with that social emotional aspect of understanding their behaviors and things like that. But I definitely think that we would have kind of a lot of points of data. Not only, the frequency of the return behavior, but you could also get some qualitative, like, talk with the student, gain their perspective, like, what did you learn? You know what I mean? So there's
Right.
a lot of things that we can gauge at, at any point, to kind of support numbers.
And I'm assuming, but I should never assume, that you guys are, that you've gone back, you said you've looked at this year's data and looked at some of these kids and said, what might have really helped this kid?
Right.
These in-school suspensions, the third one we're on, or now we're moving to out of school. Maybe what we should have done if we'd had a Saturday school, this would have been beneficial. So I assume you've got kids you're gonna kind of, in your mind, follow and see if this is beneficial and working.
Right. Absolutely. There's
Okay.
always frequent flyers that
Okay.
you're concerned with.
Okay. I mean, the math teachers were here last month talking about how they're changing, kind of quantifying who should be moved into certain levels of courses, and they were saying they went back through a couple years of data. So I figured you were doing something like that, but I just wanted to make sure. So that sounds great. The vaping, the question I had for you on the vaping, and you may not have the number off the top of your head, but how often are we bringing kids in for the cessation program? My first question you answered, which was, is 40 seat licenses enough? Is that too many? And then, are there other programs we should be looking at? I know you said this one's inexpensive. That makes me happy, but I want to make sure it's not inexpensive because it's not the most effective. Do we have a sense of how effective this program is?
So first question was how many? We had 8 students last year, and
Okay.
we've had 2 this year.
Okay.
In terms of the program itself, I did look at quite a few programs.
Okay.
It really was not just a good program, but a cost-efficient program. So it kind of met both.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. You only mentioned looking at this one, so I was like, I assume she looked at it, but I just want to make sure. Okay, and then do you have a sense of how we're going to judge whether this was effective?
Whether
If we send, let's assume worst case, we have 8 more this year that we have to send to this program, we're gonna look at numbers and say, how many of these kids did we have to deal with again? I mean, what happens when you've done this program and we catch you in a bathroom vaping again?
Right. We can certainly look at that.
Okay.
I mean, I think it would make sense to.
Yeah.
Our hope is that.
And I'm not saying it's
it
not
stops
beneficial.
it.
Right.
Right.
Okay. No, that's great. Thank you. And I appreciate you guys. I remember when we met with you first, Dr. Weidlich, that you talked a lot about alternative types of discipline. So I appreciate both of you being in new roles, that's something that you're looking at and helping us address, because obviously we want to put education at the forefront. So that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Andrew?
Just a couple quick questions. So, limitations of in-school suspensions, I'm just looking at that. It says 1920 data does not support that ISS is effective. So maybe you could kind of round that out for me about, if you're going to keep ISS as an option, in what cases might you use that?
It's a tough question. I don't think that the Saturday school would replace the ISS.
Right.
Because there are going to be times when, let's say an incident happens, kind of like what was talked about, maybe there was extreme disruption and caused I don't want to say chaos, but caused issue. I may need to remove the student and be like, it's not a good day for you to be in the classroom. However, I want you to stay in school. So that would be a hypothetical.
Right.
Something that I need to do something real quick, real swift.
Right.
So it technically wouldn't go away. But it's not technically ideal because
Yeah.
for some kids it's just a one stop. Okay,
Sure.
I got it.
Right.
Not just we, but the team talks about this is what happened. This is provide you the opportunity to explain. We make it somewhat restorative. They understand and it's done. Other students, it's just more challenging for them to understand that consequence, and it just becomes unfortunately repeated.
Right.
And it's not a huge number, but like I said, just the data that I have from my lens, it's just for some students, it's just not working.
Sure. That's helpful. Thank you.
I would think, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I would also think that with in-school suspensions, if there's, a situation that would require other school personnel to perhaps meet with the student, that would give them the opportunity to do so.
Right.
So, if perhaps it's a substance issue or something along those lines, having them in school and having them as a captive audience would present that opportunity too.
Good. Thanks. That's helpful. One more very quick question. Do you know of any other districts that have done the same kind of move? They've added Saturday school to the quiver, so to speak?
Yes, so I reached out to all the Central League principals, and I can't, forgive me, there was one district that is not doing it, but all the rest of them are, and they're all different models. Some of them have teachers there, some of them have administrators there, so it was definitely different in terms of how they ran it. The majority of them had teachers. I think Upper Darby used administrator, and Haverford used an administrator. But yeah, they're present.
To Andrew's point, actually, I was curious, do they address anything else besides what you're proposing addressing?
No.
Same kind of things?
Same
Okay.
thing.
Would a in-school suspension and the Saturday school ever be able to run simultaneously? Concurrently is, I guess, is a better word. Where a student needs to be removed for a certain type of infraction from the classroom, but still should receive the learning that they otherwise missed. Would you ever have an in-school suspension, but then on the weekend go to Saturday school?
To be honest with you, I think that is a case-by-case basis. So let's say hypothetically we are in the midst of an investigation for something, and I just don't feel comfortable, or the administrative team at the middle school or even at the high school, they don't feel comfortable with having the student in the classroom for a variety of reasons, whether, information can spread, and we're trying to isolate it. We're trying to investigate a certain incident. So we might have the student in school suspension during that, for the duration of time, and then as a result, would something else be added? It kind of depends. Was the time served? Possibly. Was it not served? I don't know. So it's a great question.
But that could happen. Yeah, that could be an option.
Could it be an
So,
option?
Can I jump in? So we've used multiple, again, I think that Dr. Weidlich and Mrs. Kevges hit the nail on the head. You're trying to use the least amount of consequences possible to remediate behavior. They're students, and you're trying to change the behavior and teach them to make sure that in the future they don't make the same decision. We have historically applied different, the idea of quivers in the arrow to address things. So if you are a student that drives recklessly on the campus, we may assign you a detention and take your parking permit for a week. And so you've gotten two consequences that are both appropriate. So in your scenario, Dr. Weidlich can certainly say, I would really give this kid an out-of-school suspension, but instead of suspending the student out of school, I'm going to give them a one-day in school and a Saturday detention. So really, there's a bunch of different options to try to get to that learning and provide the student consequences to really move them forward for better decision-making in the future.
I actually got the impression, Jesse, and tell me if I'm wrong, you were actually saying there's a benefit to the Saturday school that you're not getting from the in-school suspension. I mean, that you've got a teacher there and you're getting curriculum. I know nobody's excited about a Saturday detention, but that there's, you had in-school suspension and you didn't have the same curricular guidance that you might get in a Saturday program, and you're saying it might work
I guess I
to
was,
someone's benefit?
I guess I was kind of implying that like it would serve the benefit to, I mean, for certain instances where kids need to be removed from the classroom, like they'd probably learn better under the guidance at Saturday school. So yeah, I guess.
All right. I support this, and this is such an excellent committee. You guys covered all my questions, so I say go for it. And thank you for thinking this, bringing this up. I think this is the right way to go. So
Thank you.
sounds like we're moving forward. So thank you.
I just want to take a moment to thank both of them for and for working, with the administration as well, but for taking a look and continuing to look each year at our discipline. I mean, our goal is to reduce the discipline each year. There's a reality to some of the discipline, and sometimes when we're dealing with class cuts or different things that there's a one-time bad behavior, and kids understand that. But the goal is to always be studying this and looking at how do we reduce it, but also how do we support the kids to make better decisions. And I really appreciate the way the two of them have gone about this, and I think this will be a good option going forward. And it has been, driven by looking at our data. So thank you for your, all your efforts in this. I really appreciate it.
I can tell by the way you present this that you guys really care about our students, and that's the piece that really means something to me. So thank you.
Can I just ask, and it's kind of a procedural issue, is this something because it's a new type of discipline that needs to be added to the handbook for any reason, to notify parents that it's something that students may see?
So what we would do is we would actually ask the curriculum committee meeting to take it to the full board for approval, and then once that gets approved, then we would go and have a revision. Whenever we do revisions to the handbook, we would go and post the date and time that it was revised on the websites.
And to that end too, there's potentially some policy implications, both in terms of vaping and student discipline as well, right?
There could be. So Dr. Stevenson is aware. We've talked to Dr. Stevenson, and I don't know that there was anything directly that needed to be changed right away. We felt as much as looking at the overall policy comprehensively, we wanted to check.
So there's nuance changes because we do have detention, which is outside of the school day. So this would be a Saturday detention. We do have mandated vaping cessation currently that's taking place during the school day. This will just be on a Saturday. But I did talk with Dr. Stevenson, and we will be looking at the policy to make sure that if there's any updates that need to be made, that we will bring it to the policy committee.
Okay, good. Let's move on to, thank you. Title I. Dr. DeCovich.
Thank you, Mrs. Solomon. And Mr. Bechtold is bringing up the presentation on the screens now. So I'm very pleased to present our school-wide plan for Title I. As I've come to understand, it's important for the school board to approve the title plans each year and to understand what they're used for and how our federal dollars and where they're going toward. Before I begin the presentation, I just want to commend the team that helped. There was a lot of time and effort that were put into this plan, which included a lot of the team at Wayne Elementary. So Principal Nancy Ferguson, our Supervisor Special Ed George Rigel, our Dean of Students Heather Esposito, and we have two title teachers at Wayne, Rachel Reynolds and Maria Rowley, and then our Molly Smith here, who keeps me straight and helps me with title quite a bit. So I want to thank that team. A lot of time and effort were put into developing this plan. My presentation's hopefully capturing 33 pages of the full comprehensive plan, which was pre-approved by PDE already at this point. So if we'll move to the next slide. This slide just captures kind of an overview of federal programming. We have 4 titles. Each one has a different purpose, and there's a different dollar amount that come to each one. Title I is our predominant funding source. Nearly $500,000 coming through Title I. Some of that is meant for our non-public institutions, but the vast majority is for the students at Radnor Township. We use those funds primarily for staffing at Wayne. Title II, we get a far less number there, but a little over $100,000 yearly. We use those funds for class size reduction also at Wayne, and we could use those really in a number of different ways, but class size reduction allows us to add a teacher and keep our class sizes small. Title III is meant for English language development. We use the funds there primarily to run an ELD camp in the summer, which supports our English language development over the summer, so those students can participate in camp and continue their proficiency acquisition throughout the summer months. Finally, in Title IV, we receive funds for professional development, not very much. Most of the funds in Title IV actually go to support our non-public institutions, so the 12 non-public institutions that are in our area. So that kind of captures the overview of federal programming. Titles 2, 3, and 4 are pretty much situated in a way that support those three different areas. Title I is the one title that you cannot transfer funds out of. It also doesn't have a cap. You can use it in different ways. And in the next slide, I'll share with you the shift that we're trying to make, which is a very popular shift right now. And the shift is going from a targeted Title I program to a school-wide Title I program. And the whole reason and purpose that this even became available for us, typically you cannot become a school-wide program unless you have 40% free and reduced population or greater. We are at about 16% at Wayne Elementary. So we have to apply as a school-wide program, and PD has to approve our program. So in looking at that, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was enacted in 2015 by President Obama, this provided much greater flexibility in how we fund and how we use our funds, and really encourages in many different ways, in many different levels, looking at not just targeted students, but how we can universally support students on any level in different ways. And you talk about tiered intervention systems, and you've heard from Dr. Wildlick over the last couple months about MTSS and his aim to implement that with great fidelity at the middle school. MTSS has been something that Radnor has actually investigated the last 2 years or more, and have had IU support in, consultation support in. We've sent staff out for training and investigation last year with the team, and we're at a point now where we feel like we can implement MTSS really effectively. And one thing that PD really likes to see is tiered supports that are universally going to support children, not just targeted. So we had a great opportunity with ESSA. It really changed the way we can look at how our title funds are spent and how we can put them toward a more universal design. MTSS, as I mentioned, is not just something that the middle school has talked about. It's going to be part of our special education comprehensive plan. It's going to be part of our Radnor Township comprehensive plan. And now it is our title school-wide plan. So there's a lot of cohesiveness and connectedness between MTSS and all of the components that make up our district and programming. On to the next slide. There are three sometimes lengthy resources for you to reference. The middle one, leveraging Title I school-wide programs, is an excellent summary, which is readily used as a resource, and this was provided to me at a training. And I feel like it captures the essence of why we should go from targeted to school-wide and why most districts are moving to school-wide now, even though they may not have 40% free and reduced population at a single school. Moving on to the next slide. That 33-page school-wide document that I mentioned includes a needs assessment, looking at our strengths and areas of need, really looking critically at our programs, and you'll see different ratings and where we put ourselves there and where we want to be. Of course, we want to move to the exemplary range in all of the categories that are listed in the school-wide plan. But just to capture with brevity the 4 goals that make up our plan. First, our vision is to utilize academic and social-emotional data to reduce the achievement gap, not just with, again, our lower achieving students, but with all students, and look at where they are and where we can move them to. Obviously, we want to provide the highest potential in a safe, equitable, and caring environment. That's the vision of the school-wide plan. Within the school-wide plan, there are 4 main goals. The first is to focus on continuous improvement of instruction. And the way we aim to do that is through implementing MTSS. And this is not just a school-wide plan for Wayne. Our aim to implement MTSS will also happen at the other 2 elementary schools. Our second goal is to empower leadership, and that's using and ensuring equitable appropriation of resources. So we're a targeted program. We have 2 title teachers currently that only see students who meet criteria for targeted instruction. We would now be able to use those same 2 teachers and others to provide instruction for all students based on their level and need. So we're really able to more efficiently use the resources we have and then access resources that we haven't had before. Our third goal is to continue to connect our MTSS program, our implementation of MTSS with our existing positive behavior support program that exists at Wayne. And in the other 2 schools, you've heard way back when we did our achievement report, all of our work towards climate. and the implementation of morning meeting time and wellness initiatives, things like that are happening. And then the fourth goal is the career standards benchmark, which you've heard quite a bit about, our career standards 339 plan, all of the things we're working on there. This fits right into all of those things. So again, we're making connections to many other priority projects and goals that already exist. So those are the four goals of our school-wide plan. And just to capture again, what does an MTSS program do for us? One, it will utilize best practices in federal funding and resources to meet the needs of all of our students, not just those that currently reach targeted criteria. It will allow us to implement an MTSS process with administrative oversight, and that will support academic and social emotional needs of our students. So the third bullet on here, which is a pretty important one, we feel like the funding in title will enable us to hire an assistant principal at Wayne, a full-time assistant principal at Wayne, that will oversee MTSS and help to draw all those conclusions together, activate staff most efficiently, and make sure the fidelity of the program is at the highest level. And finally, recognizing a need for MTSS oversight, the plan was currently approved by our local and regional program coordinators for the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So in essence, that is our Title I school-wide plan. And we've actually been given preliminary approval to begin this current school year. We have a lot of unspent Title I dollars that have been rolled over the last 3 years. And when I mentioned the prospective idea of adding an assistant principal at Wayne, we have money that we have to spend down or we'll lose, and it's close to $300,000. So in looking at this closely, we feel like the MTSS process is going to be critical in all 3 schools. The addition of an assistant principal at Wayne will be because of the needs at that school and also because we run a life skills program. All those components add up to administrative oversight will really help fidelity of the programming and the integrity of the programming. And we'll be able to afford the assistant principal using just title funds at the minimum of 4 years and liberally for more.
This is something that we have been discussing the last couple of years, what is the right support structure at our elementary level, and we've made some adjustments the last couple of years. Some of those adjustments were based on budget, some of those adjustments were based on looking at what were the needs at the time, and we've continued to evaluate it. It's one of the things that when Sean first came on, I said to him, we need to evaluate the structure of the supports at the elementary level. Here's what we've been doing the last couple of years. This is a wonderful opportunity to put in a much improved programming for our students. It is an opportunity also to have that assistant principal be afforded through the federal dollars. It would take, currently our structure is right now, we have a dean of students, and the dean of students goes between part-time, and it's a dean of students, so it's a pseudo administrator, but it's within the teacher bargaining dean of students that goes between Wayne and Radnor as part-time. And we moved away this year from having any additional support for Ithan. So what we would propose with this is not only to bring back the assistant principal, have a full-time assistant principal at Wayne, but then to take that dean position that is currently split between 2 buildings and instead have it split between Ithan and Radnor. And so it would be split between Ithan and Radnor, and we would take away the dean status and make that assistant principal as well. And that way we can then leverage what we're doing at Wayne with MTSS to also have that happen at Radnor and Ithan as well through the additional administrative support. So what are the dollars and the impact on us? The dollars and impact on us is 4 or 5 years, depending on our federal funding. We're going to have to reevaluate and just see where we are in 4 or 5 years with the funding for Wayne. For the piece between moving our current dean and making that position an assistant principal would be an additional cost. It's not a large additional cost because that position can go as high as the top of the teacher's contract now as a position for dean, and moving that to an administrator, remove that position and make that position an assistant principal. There would be a cost there, but we actually think there's some offsets we can look at as we look at some of the federal dollars as well to help smooth that out.
All right, questions? Should we go this way this time? You want to start, Sarah?
Sure. So I want to understand. I went last year. You guys ran a great program at the middle school. I know you weren't here, but it was a great program. And if you run it again this year, I think it'd be really beneficial. Where they were at the middle school, it was one evening, and parents got exposure to different things. There was like a Schoology session, and one of the sessions was on Title I. And I actually went to that because I wanted to see how the parents, the types of questions they asked, and it was very educational. There was actually one of the teachers who's a Title I teacher was there and ran the program. And one of the things I was struck by was that kids who come to that Title I program, it's not based on their financial need. That doesn't tie to their free and reduced status. It ties to their actual academic need for the program. But then once you benefited from it, you were essentially kicked out of it, right? You don't get to stay in it because of the way that system is set up. So I love the idea that it would be school-wide, and we can continue to support a kid who's needed this help so that we aren't, they aren't bouncing back and forth in and out of the program as they need it. We can kind of continue to give them those supports. So I think that's a great idea. And I appreciate that it's kind of the new way of thinking about things and that's beneficial. I guess the question I have, and I do not at all mean to say that there is not benefit in administrators, but I think there's a lot of people who would say, why are we spending money on an assistant principal? I think you started to talk about this, but I want to hear more about why that money is better spent on an assistant principal and not more teachers in the building, hands-on with the kids. If we have this kind of need and we can do it school-wide, why aren't we, putting those people in classrooms?
I think one of the things we've recognized at Wayne is they do have a need for an assistant principal in a lot of different ways. I came from a school which implemented a life skills program. I can tell you from experience, it consumed probably 40 to 50% of my day with a classroom of 10 children. And it was a wonderful addition to the school, and it added so much diversity and so many wonderful levels. And it was great for the kids. But those kids have tremendous needs, and they have a lot of, there's a lot of time that needs to be spent to make sure their programming is at the highest level. So that's a relatively new thing for Wayne, and that's evolved quite a bit. So,
That exists only at Wayne.
and that only exists at Wayne.
Just for people who don't know, can you tell us what a life skills I mean, I have a sense, but I think it's helpful for people in the community to understand what we're talking about.
So these are special needs children who reside in Radnor and may be a resident in Radnor Elementary or Ithan Elementary, but they actually will come to Wayne for this program. And there's special services, special personnel who reside at the school who can provide this multi-level support that they need. Most of it is cognitive, but there's a lot of physical. There's a lot of need there. So it really spans the spectrum of everything you could think of. And they're wonderful children, and they add so much to the school culture, but they just require a lot of personnel and support. And a lot of that, a typical IEP meeting may last 45 minutes. In another school, most of their IEP meetings, because of their needs, may last hours. And so when you're taking an administrator out of those situations, and only they can oversee the process of an IEP meeting, we've realized that, Nancy Ferguson is just one person, and she has 583 children as of today. And so that ratio is so great. And looking creatively at the ESSA changes and the flexibility in title funds, we thought, wow, we could really do some great things here, not just to benefit all of the students and move to the school-wide program, but gosh, we can afford to add this assistant principal back that once existed for years. And kind of balance some of the things that are currently going on there. I'm sure if you had a conversation with Mrs. Ferguson, she would be up front with the needs that are going on there. And Wayne's a really tremendous school. I think this is a great win for us on so many levels. And their team's excited because, again, the targeted program offers them only so many opportunities to influence the trajectory for children. MTSS really takes that up so many levels.
And I know I've seen actually the life skills program at the middle school in action. Is the idea that this life skills program feeds into that one, or we have a connection between the two programs? And make
Absolutely,
sure that, okay.
Absolutely. As children matriculate up, they go to the next level program.
Okay, is this the first year we're doing that at Wayne, are you saying? Or we've done it and it's just become we have enough kids
evolved.
enrolled that it's
Yeah.
become a challenge?
It's called a low
Okay.
incidence classroom, but essentially it serves the neediest children in our special ed population, essentially.
Okay.
Your question reminds me of early on in my teaching when I decided I thought I'd want to get certificates to become an administrator. I had somebody say to me, well, you better be the best teacher in that building if you want to be an administrator someday. So when we hire administrators and some of the focus and the name our department is teaching and learning, our focus is on teaching and learning. So we're not bringing an administrator in to solely manage. I mean, we're bringing somebody who's focused on instruction, focused on the teaching and learning. And for what we're trying to do with MTSS, it also takes that ability to have someone to make sure that all the pieces are being implemented across an entire building. And there are certain opportunities that an administrator has to have that oversight and be able to do that I think can be very beneficial.
So if you get board approval for this position, a key portion of the job posting will be someone who has the skills to run an MTSS program, because that, we would expect Principal Ferguson to be able to delegate to the assistant principal and really be responsible for that entire program, or just the life skills program.
Yeah, absolutely. I think assistant principals sometimes get a rap for just being in charge of discipline, really, and it's so much more than that. And we want, like Mr. Basher said, we want this person to oversee the fidelity of MTSS, so it's done really well, and also to be a prime communicator between the other two buildings. So when MTSS is happening there, that between the assistants and the principals and myself, that our programming looks very similar in the three buildings. Right now, we have supports. We have some tiered supports. They look very different depending on where you are and what type of child you're presenting. We want to build some continuity around MTSS and do it with fidelity and consistency. So if you're at Radnor, you're at Ithan, you're at Wayne, you're getting a similar experience as a child.
Just get me up to date. So we are calling this life skills class, is that what we used to call the Castle program? Or do we still have the Castle program?
I'm not sure about the Castle program. I can say that it's evolved. You know, it's...
Maybe. Right, I know we've had life skills classes, but we used to have specifically a Castles program at Wayne.
So it's transition from Castle to.
So those students are now in what we're calling this life skills class?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we just have one? Or
We
do
have
we
one
also have an
program.
autism class? We just have a life skills?
It's called low incidence, so it's really, you know how it is. It's so hard to identify because they're so unique to each individual.
So it's just the one class?
Yes.
Okay.
And we run the DCIU program, of course, at Ithan, but...
Did you have anything more? Okay, Andrew?
Sure. So, this is great. It's a trip. And, I have a lot of questions and or comments, I guess. And I think that just maybe with the simplest question, the logistics of an assistant principal working across two schools, is that something of concern, or how would that play out possibly? Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that there would be an assistant principal for Wayne, but also an additional assistant principal at some point working across Ithan and Radnor. Is that correct?
That's correct. So splitting time between buildings seems cumbersome. I think it's worked in different ways, in the past. Currently we have Heather Esposito playing the dean, and she's done a great job between two different buildings. And what the nice thing about it is, Ithan's relatively smaller in size, and some of the needs, although Dr. Boylan would probably disagree with me, they're not all that different in size. But Radnor Elementary, for example, is our largest elementary. For example, at Radnor right now we have 658 children, and Ithan we have 511 children. So there's a significant, you could argue, a significant difference there. But splitting buildings, I think, can work as long as you have consistency, you have strong communication, you build continuity between things. And there's actually some advantages of splitting time because you have the same presence in two places. And if communication is strong, then you're going to replicate programming with fidelity, more so than three individuals sometimes, So yeah, we feel at this point that amount of staff could really behoove all the things we want to do and work well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And, if at some point a need for a dedicated assistant principal at each elementary,
No.
that could be explored, no?
No. Finish your comments.
Okay. I just, throwing it out there. Sorry? Okay. All right, so just a hypothetical. So I just wanted to make a general kind of paint a picture type comment, which is that, based on my understanding and from our conversation during the planning meeting, I think it maybe is good to just kind of spell it out. I mean, you did mention it in the PowerPoint, but just to kind of pull out the point and really make it clear that, my understanding is that ESSA has basically made this possible. In other words, before ESSA, in 2016, you had to basically have a targeted program where you identified kids who were eligible or not eligible. Is that understanding correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And so now, with the reforms in ESSA, it's allowed there for there to be some flexibility for schools to apply for Title I funds for this purpose. But just looking at that document, could you talk a little bit more about the 40% threshold? And the document I was referring to is the helping document that you talked about, leveraging Title I. Talks about the second criterion in the middle there. It says a Title I school, the little like blue school little building thing. A Title I school with less than 40% of students in poverty that receives a waiver from an SEA. Could you maybe just describe that process a little bit? Or?
No, absolutely. So when we were strongly encouraged by federal program trainers to go to school-wide, regardless of the percentage for free and reduced, the next step was to put in an intent to go school-wide. So I brought that back. We talked as a team. We looked at the advantages and disadvantages. We found very little, if any, disadvantages. And we submitted an intent to go school-wide, which was pre-approved. And then from there, we had to submit the 33-page school-wide document. So that's what they consider a waiver. So you have to then, if you were 40%, we could just say, we're school-wide.
Right.
And we wouldn't have to spell out exactly what we were going to do. Because we're smaller, we have to show that why those federal dollars are going to be best spent going school-wide, despite, when we used to be targeted.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess you might be guessing where I'm going with this, which is that it seems like at some point, I mean, a school might just ask itself, why wouldn't it? And it seems like like we're a little bit ahead of a wave or a trend, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. If you talk to local school districts, almost everyone is going school-wide. It takes a lot of time and effort, which may prohibit some, but if you go that direction, it gives you far more flexibility.
Right.
And you don't have the issue with kids coming and going and qualifying and not qualifying, and you could really just create a universal design to support all students, different tiers.
Great, and thank you for walking me through that. And again, just to kind of tease out a point or to underline it for the conversation, it seems that now, we've got two trends that are going to work really well in favor for all of our kids, which, and this is something that we talked about when Dave had his presentation on MTSS, but we're moving from a system where you're identifying kids as needing special services at a certain stage in their development, which is perfectly fine, but it's actually taking advantage of better research and better programming that shows that you can meet a kid's needs on a flexible basis. And now you're just sort of expanding that to the entire school. So it seems that MTSS and the school-wide is meant to work together. Is that?
Oh, absolutely. The state, they want a multi-tiered system of supports. They very much want MTSS. So when we looked at this, we thought, wow, this is beautiful. This is going to work well.
Yeah, that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's already 6:30, but I know you probably have questions. So we also still have another agenda item, so how
That's
would
me,
we-
but I'll be quick on that one.
Okay, all right, so then let's proceed with the conversation, yeah.
So maybe I just missed this, but I'm trying to figure out if ESSA was passed in 2015 and it's now 2020, help me better understand, is this something that's new that was phased in and is now only becoming available to school districts, or?
It's a great question. One, I would say PDE works very slowly sometimes to communicate out the different possibilities and avenues you can take. ESSA, it took some time for them to work through the interpretation of the changes in the law from No Child Left Behind to ESSA. And there was a lot of, one of the documents I provided, that was the third one over. One of the reasons I included this was I think it captures some misunderstandings
I've read
and
that.
misinterpretations. And this is where I think a lot of folks have gotten hung up. When ESSA was first implemented, people read it different ways. They interpreted it differently. And they were afraid to make sweeping changes like a school-wide program from a targeted because they weren't quite yet confident that that was part of ESSA and it was okay. And it took some time for the training to happen, the professional development to roll out throughout the state. But now, my first training as a federal programs coordinator was literally the person said, if you're not going school-wide, you're doing a disservice to your children. And he said that to a room of school districts with federal program coordinators. So I think this is going to be a trend everywhere because really we're far more flexible in how we spend the dollars and how we meet the needs of children.
And I have two more questions. One is, I was always under the impression that EL is for students for whom English is not their first language. But looking at the numbers of how EL has grown, is that still the case, or is it just lack of English language proficiency in general, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not your native language?
EL does refer to students who have English as a second language or not their native language. It does. We have seen an enrollment increase in students who are coming with EL backgrounds. And that's a whole other conversation. As part of our enrollment study as well that we're looking at that. Our EL department has done a phenomenal job, in meeting those needs, but it has been a growing population. But it's funny, after ESSA, meeting their needs and shrinking the achievement gap, they're now part of those expectations and they're not separated anymore. So it's our challenge to help them, make the gains that they need to make as part of the large population, not just the subpopulation.
And that was also, that was a good segue into my third question. Although I did want to make the comment that imagine what PDE will come up with in 2025 if this is what they came up with 5 years later after ESSA. There could be something else under the hood that's amazing for kids, and hopefully we'll get to it sooner than 5 years. But the achievement gap, something that every school district, including ours, is really concerned about. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but can you somehow succinctly tell us a little bit about that? That jumped out at me in the presentation because you had it very explicitly that this is supposed to address this. Give us some sense.
Yeah, so MTSS allows us to build interventions in for children no matter where they are. A lot of times our children at the high end also don't get the time that they deserve, right? Because a lot of our efforts are spent at the remediation level. And MTSS allows us to tier and flex group and provide interventions to students no matter where they are, so that their version of progress is achieved and is focused on. And they don't become, they're a high achieving student, not to worry about them. Like that's not, MTSS addresses all levels, all things, not just academic, social, emotional needs, everything under the umbrella. That's the purpose of it. So when you have a student with an achievement gap, you're not just looking at math, you're looking at what are the other barriers for them to achieve. What are the things that go into that? And then using small group targeted instruction that's flexibly grouped and data driven, you can actually, instead of asking a teacher with 20 other students to say, oh, by the way, you also have to meet the needs of your lowest achieving students while also meeting the needs of your highest achieving students. We're able to do this much more on a practical level by flex grouping and using the intervention block that we already have in our schedule, which is a 1 hour block in the elementary schedule, or a 50-minute block, I should say, every day.
That's so interesting because I think the typical interpretation of achievement gap is one cohort of learners. But if I get what you're saying, it's actually there can be an achievement gap at all levels of learning. We don't think about it that way, I think, that often, but this is meant to make sure that there are fewer of those gaps and we close as much of that as possible. And I assume that there'll be some follow-up after this is implemented for a year or so to show us how that, in effect, is happening.
Part of the title plan is that we have those measurable goals that I kind of highlighted the 4 just for brevity. If you go in, you'll see there are quarterly benchmarks that we have to meet and report on. So absolutely, I'll be able to tell you where we are now, where we started with, and where we end up in the end.
Beyond the PA Future Ready Index metrics, right? Other things as well?
Absolutely. And MTSS uses a data-driven process. So naturally, we'll have metrics that we can compare against.
Okay, great, thank you.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Okay, any questions? Okay, you need a microphone.
We're looking to bring some administration in, but there's a lot of action steps that involve the counselor at Wayne. You have one counselor at Wayne to handle a lot of issues. Is there any consideration to get her some help to do all this also?
It's a great question, Andrea. I think at this point, we're looking at the cohesiveness of the school-wide plan. I think the ancillary, the things that we may find later, could that potentially be a question mark? It could. I don't know right now. We haven't put it into action yet to see if that's a necessary addition or need. I think wellness in general is a need. I think our K-12 wellness and guidance or counseling person that we're looking at, we're close to coming to an end with our process. I think that they're going to aid a great deal in building continuity in our K-12 wellness and guidance, or counseling. Gosh, I keep saying the wrong word. I think that's kind of a to be determined. I don't think anybody has said, no, we don't need that. I think it's let's see what happens. Great question, though.
Jess, anything on this? Okay, so,
Can I add one quick finance
sure.
committee question? Any chance this is already in the budget where we have a shortfall for next year? Is this already built into what the finance committee has seen?
Yeah, so if the board approves, by approving we're gonna move through this committee, we're gonna move the Title I application forward for a vote next week. In proving that Title I application, we would have the dollars to post for right away for these positions, so we wouldn't have to wait for next school year.
So
We
for
could
an
start the
assistant
process.
principal, both at Wayne, and then a separate assistant principal instead of just a dean of students?
Correct, to go
Okay.
between, yes, we would be able to
Okay.
do
oh,
that
wait a
budget.
minute.
No,
You're-
that's
so
the piece
you're
I think you
not-
were missing. We're talking an
I
assistant
thought we
principal
were-
at Wayne, and separately, not a dean of students between Radnor and Ethan, but an assistant
and
principal between.
keep the dean of students position as well?
No, we would not.
They'd change it to it.
We
They
would not. We would,
change it to
we
an
would
assistant
essentially
principal.
go for first.
So this is
we
my
essentially drop
chance
that
to,
position.
this is my chance to jump in here. Okay, I'm going to call, I've heard this before. Okay, so we used to not have assistant principals at the elementary schools. We had, it was basically like a learning specialist who would do the IEP meetings, would cover them if the principal couldn't make it, but I think they did a lot of other duties. They functioned like an assistant principal in effect. And then we were told, no, we've got to have assistant principals at the elementary school. So we did. We went out and hired great people. There were 2 of them, and they split the job. One of them was at 2 buildings, and I believe the other one was full-time at Wayne. And we didn't hear complaints about that. Then we heard, oh, no, we don't need this. This is, overkill or whatever. We don't need this. We need to get rid of those positions and have a dean of students. So now we're being told, no, we really, we need those positions. I mean, I'm sorry, it's whiplash for me to be told within a couple years that something that we were, presented, that we have to do this, or we have to go this way, and now we have to go back this way. I just don't like the yanking around of the building structure in this way. I feel that it's too soon to be telling us we have to go the other way now, that what we had in place, we were told or assured wasn't the right thing. This was the better model. What we have now is the better model. We were told that just a couple of years ago, and now you're saying, oh, no. Now we got to go back and hire new positions.
Well, and does it tie to
I'm calling,
enrollment?
I don't buy it this time. I understand that you have Title I money, I understand it's a different set of eyes, so this is in no indictment probably of any of you, because I don't think any of you were here when those earlier decisions were made, but,
And that, I think that was, I was trying to
our
ask,
current
is this
model,
about
like, why- we
enrollment?
were
Well, our
told this
enrollment
was
numbers have gone up significantly in just the
Not
last few years.
that
We have 40 or
significant.
50 new kids at
Well-
Ithan this year, correct? Even more than that, but at Ithan, which is the school that doesn't have an assistant principal this year. But that's, and I know, Leah, we're running short on time, but I didn't think you'd heard this, and I wanted to make sure we had that conversation, because I knew you have concerns about this. But I think I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I assumed you were doing this because it ties to enrollment, that we've had spikes in enrollment we weren't necessarily expecting just 2 years ago when we had talks about the enrollment. And I know you weren't here, Mr. Jukevich, but we have had those conversations.
I mean, enrollment's a factor, but it's not the only factor. I mean, the driving factor is looking at this programming, looking at what's the programming we want to have for our buildings, looking at this MTSS, looking at the federal dollars we have that can support that. One of the things I had asked Mr. Dukevich, and Sean can speak freely on this, when he started, is I said, I need you to look at the elementary structure and the supports. We have been making some changes over the last few years with the elementary supports, and I would like you to study that this year. I had shared with the elementary principals that we would look at it and that we would come up with, instead of making changes. We have been making changes, but we've been making changes that have been thoughtful, that have been based on budget, been based on program, and as a district, we have to be continually take the opportunities each year to look at what's working well, what adjustments we need to make, and how do those adjustments impact and improve us. We don't want to have whiplash. I would say in the last 3 years, it's not whiplash. I think that we've been trying to be very thoughtful about what structure made sense. When I started 3 years ago, we had a structure where we had 5 people in a department in the district office, and we felt that maybe we didn't need 5 there. There was a lot of feeling from many people, not just from the district office itself and the administrators, but from the board, from other aspects of the district as well. So as we look to do that, as we look to make changes with that department that was 5, that is now at 3, we went 2 years ago down in that department to actually really 2.4, I think it was. We looked at opportunities to take some of our curriculum staff and give them opportunities as a role as an assistant principal in the buildings. After we did that 1 year with Dr. Murray, we even then talked about let's bring her full-time back in. So we adjusted the following year for good reasons, looking at good data, and said, you know what, we tried this, now we've brought her in that position back full-time. So we did have an overall reduction. It was thanks to we had the opportunities with people that had left the district or had retirements came about. So it was through attrition. So there have been multiple factors of looking at programming, looking at what were the opportunities within the budget. Frankly, 3 years ago, we needed to make some budget cuts. We're still at a place this year with the budget where we're looking at a budget where we need to, close a shortfall between now and June. So all those thoughtful discussions have happened. One thing I didn't expect from this year was Mr. Dukevich and Mr. Bechtold to be as efficient as the two of them are. The two of them are unbelievable with their ability to analyze situations, to work closely with our principals, and to figure out how do we move forward. So I even teased him and said, I was really looking for this recommendation for the fall. But it makes so much sense to move forward with this now. Will we eventually someday be looking at expanding one of the assistant principals at the buildings? It could certainly happen as enrollment changes, as program changes, or could we be looking at adding a counselor? That could certainly be part of the discussions. I don't want to ever put us in a spot where we're looking at whether we're changing the school start time at the high school and adjusting our other buildings, or we're looking at these pieces, that we're saying this is definitively the way we're going to do something and this is now set for the next few years. We're going to continue to evaluate every year, and we're going to continue to be thoughtful, and we're going to be willing to say, we tried this hasn't worked well, this is how we think it can work better. This plan right now with the MTSS, which we've been talking about for several years, this is going to move us forward to put in a program to put in a structure that I think not only will our teachers be engaged in and proud of, but I think the benefits for our kids, and the benefits for our kids not only just at Wayne, but at all 3 of our elementary programs is really exciting. And that opportunity has happened also because, you see, it all comes into play. We have a way to pay for it. We also have a way to pay for it, which is exciting as well. So we're able to add a position, add an administrative position, and it's not going to impact our budget. So part of the reason why we can go and do this right now is as soon as we hire them, we're drawing down funds through the title programming.
Ken, I appreciate your long-winded explanation. No, I think that's good. And my feeling, it was mentioned earlier in the meeting that, there's something to be said to deferring to the experts who are in charge of teaching and learning and the people who are in the buildings. I'm not in the buildings very much. I know when I go through during American Education Week, and I've been through Wayne Elementary, I think, in my amateur opinion, I can totally see, especially with the implementation of a new program like this, why additional support might be needed. So I don't have that whiplash sense at all. I really do understand, and defer to the expertise of people who are in the buildings all the time and the boots on the ground with the students, what the needs in those buildings are. I think it's important that we ask questions and we understand better what it is we're going to be voting on and approving. But at the end of the day, I personally don't feel I'm in any position to tell you who are running our educational program what we do and don't need. So I appreciate the explanation, and it's a, hopefully this will be something that'll be launched and at the end of the day accomplish exactly what it set out to do. So that would be a win-win for everybody.
Okay, well, I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying, oh, I know what the schools need. I am parroting back what we have been told by previous, in previous meetings of this exact committee. We were told that we needed, Roberta sat here too, we were told, and also very eloquent explanations of why we needed to go each way each time we made those changes. And I guess I don't understand, so the explanation we were given why we don't need the vice principals, I still don't see what significantly changed other than that we have Title I funding, but that still doesn't, to me, draw a direct correlation to what is so significantly different that we need to put those positions back in. What am I missing, Roberta?
Well, actually, let me just, real quick, I think Ken said it earlier when he was talking about, administrators, good administrators, all things being equal, it's good if they have lots of good teaching experience. And then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were sort of elaborating there and saying that with this program, that it would really be helpful to have an administrator that would be able to really take leadership with this new approach. I mean, that was my understanding. I.e. the new approach necessitates a new level of administration. No?
I'm sorry. I just, I just don't buy it. It's not that significantly different than the structure of our schools isn't that different, and we've been told we need to go various ways. And
But Ken was saying to Sean, that was something that was very important.
Right. I support
try
this
to get
change.
this going.
I don't know that we need an administrator to make this change. This is more having to do with your learning support specialist than that you need an administrator to oversee this.
But that's more of maybe that could be more, let's say, characteristics of a targeted model where you're identifying kids and you have a person, whereas with the whole school model.
You just turned it off.
With a whole school model, it's a different approach.
Okay, so.
And Lydia, and also, in fairness, you have history beyond my 3 years as well, so you have history, and so maybe you and I can talk, maybe you and I can talk offline too, just a little bit more about that as well. I'd be happy to, discuss that more, because, I understand where you're coming from with that longer history of pieces, but I think we just, we have to be very careful. We administratively, whatever we, what we're recommending and how we're moving forward, we also have to be willing to evaluate whatever that is and make adjustments always. And that's always part of. So I hope from what you're hearing from me and, I'll say this team and over the last, 3 years is not that this is the one way of doing and this is it. Whatever we do it, and then we evaluate and we try to figure out how can we adjust and does adjustments need. I mean, we should as a district always be on continuous improvement. Continuous improvement doesn't need to mean and shouldn't equal whiplash, but continuous improvement means that opportunity to continually look at how we can improve. But you do have longer history than I do, and we can talk offline about that.
Literally, we've gone from A to B to A, and now you want to go back to B. And that's literally what we've done. We didn't have them, we had them, we didn't have them, now you want them again. That's all I'm saying.
Well, and
All right,
that was
let's
why I
move
raised
on.
it, was so that you had a chance to make sure you talk to people before next month and or next week, and you don't feel like you're forced into voting on something that you haven't had a chance to vet. So hopefully you can take that.
And if I can add just 3 things to think about while you're considering this over the next month, this information. I think if you were to talk to Dr. Boylan, Dr. Stevenson, Nancy Ferguson, and ask them what has changed as a building administrator over the last 3 to 5 years, and I would say, as someone who spent 12 years as an elementary principal, tremendous change. Not just the administrative tasks and challenges, such as the 339 plan that's new. SLOs are relatively new. That's just in the last 5 years. Those are administrative tasks that require oversight, fidelity, just a lot of work that just can't always come from one person. I would say the enrollment increases at Radnor have been exponential. That does have an impact. It just draws your resources out. There's less and less time. And honestly, the overall student wellness and some of the challenges that have come to our door are greater than I've ever seen in 20 years. Dr. Boyle and I had a conversation this weekend about just that. And those are the things I think, if they're going to resonate, that's what has changed. And that's where I think an administrator who can be someone who can oversee programming, who can meet with teachers, who can support professional growth, who can sit in on meetings and guide the team. That only one person, when you have over 500 kids and a staff of close to 100, that's tremendously difficult with these new things that keep coming our way. So that's what I would say is different now than maybe existed 2 years ago. And that just came to mind now. I could probably come up with a bigger list if you want one. But
Well, that might be useful for me, because I have to call, I am skeptical, because
Absolutely.
I've heard
yeah.
this and
No.
that and this and that back and forth. So
Absolutely.
anyway, to be continued also. Shall we move on to our last agenda item?
I will try to be brief on this. So kindergarten registration, beneath the umbrella of our enrollment study, I was asked to look at how we onboard our students at the start of the school year. So past practice was kindergarten students would come the first couple days of school for a truncated beginning. They would do a screening process, social events, and through the first 2 days, teachers would have to ascertain how to place kids. They would place them, and then students would find out their placement typically on the second day of school for the third day. So they would come in, they would spend time with a certain teacher. Some of them would gain an affinity for that teacher and find out that they're not getting that teacher, they're getting somebody else. And you know how young 5-year-olds, and in some cases 4-year-olds, are very impressionable. So I went around and talked to the three cohorts of kindergarten teachers at each of the schools. There was strong consensus for making a change for this. And we developed a small steering committee, which included Dr. Boylan. And we looked at moving our screening process to late spring, early summer. So this would be May and June, and marry it with the time when a parent comes to the school to finish their paper registration. And we thought this was a really efficient process. The parent would come to the school, they would get to bring their child to the school many times for the first time. They would do the paper registration with our central registrar, and then simultaneous to that, they would have a very brief screening process that would give us a pinpointed time where they are academically. And then on a different day, all registered kindergartners will come back, and the date will actually be June 5th, and they'll have a social event where the teachers can marry the academic screener with their social and emotional, their behaviors really, and how they interact with peers, and then use both of those indicators to do placement before the end of the school year, just like we do for all other children. So then the beginning of the school year, they would start day 1, just like their siblings would. They would know their teacher in advance. All that anxiety would go away. One question that's come around is, when you screen in the late spring, is that drastically different from a screen in September? Some could argue yes or no. In speaking to the kindergarten cohorts, speaking to Dr. Boylan, who has a lot of experience with early childhood education, we felt that it was very relative. Where a student may be in May, they may grow a little bit over the summer, so it may be a little different in September, but we knew that a student not knowing an alphabet letter and then learning how to read Harry Potter was a pretty drastic change that would not typically occur. So the teams felt confident that any screener we used in the late spring was going to give them enough of an indicator for a strong placement. And even now, as we've done it, it's never been a perfect science. So again, there was strong consensus on this change. I actually introduced this at our PTO council meeting 2 weeks ago. Unanimous positivity behind it.
Would you say it was unanimous on the steering committee as well?
I would, and Dr. Boylan, if you'd like to add anything, I mean, she helped lead that, and a lot of the information you see in here was crafted from Dr. Boylan and that team.
Any pressing questions on this that anybody wants covered now? Okay.
No, I think it's great. Again, another example of making sure that you're, getting every minute out of the instructional day with our students and not creating extra angst unnecessarily for our kindergartners. I think it's wonderful.
Great.
And did you say that are there new things to how you're conducting registration, especially in light of, say, moving up the date for registration?
So the screener, we've used a screener at each school. It just looked different. That's one of the reasons we're creating a universal screening tool. So what we do at Itham will be the same at Radnor, will be the same at Wayne. So that's one nice thing that's different. With regard to the policy change 201, we have had some requests for that. We've a case-by-case basis, and I can talk about that at a different time. But otherwise, we've moved registration instead of 1 week at the school and the rest of it here. We've now added 2 weeks at the school setting, which gives parents even more opportunities. And we're hoping that's going to encourage parents to register sooner, so we have a better idea of how many kids are in our system and how our placement can work. And then with that carrot, where there's going to be a nice social event on June 5th, I think that's going to help. We've already seen a nice increase in enrollment at this point in the year right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at least they've communicated enrollment right now.
Okay, good. That seems like
Yeah.
a good move forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Is there any new business? Seeing none, it's our last round of public comment. Is there any public comment?
Hi, Roberta Winters, 326 Williams Road. I may be a little scattered because I've been writing a lot of notes. The first thing I would like to say is I believe it's important that we've talked, and I've heard a lot of the words data-driven in terms of whether we're talking about screening or this new multi-tiered approach. And I really think we need to continually look at what's student-driven and not what's data-driven, because sometimes data alone doesn't tell us what a student is really doing. Secondly, I would like to, as you look to the future of title money, I think in my past in Radnor, title money was sometimes spent on preschool and early childhood efforts, and I think proactive efforts are always better than reactive efforts. And so I think if there are ways that we can look at providing support for preschoolers who are at risk would be a valuable thing. I know it's being done in other ways, but I think title money is one avenue that could be used more effectively. I know in the past we've used it collaboratively between districts because we have not necessarily had the same number of eligible students, but now that eligibility may have changed, that might be something we want to look at more closely. I know there's been a lot of talk tonight about mental health, wellness, counseling, and other terms such as that. I happened to hear something recently on public radio about some new research which talks to activity levels and mental health and emotional needs, and that students who sit for long periods of time are more at risk for mental health and depression and other kinds of issues. I think it really needs to be looked at closely. You know, I'm a strong advocate for recess, but this is not just recess. This just may be walking around, stretching, and other things. And I do believe, given the climate in which we find many of our students, we really need to approach wellness by looking at not just counseling and supports and homework, but also in terms of their activity level. We all got that. The other thing I would like to mention, yeah, we do need to stand up and stretch. You know what, the mind can only endure what the seat can. So the other thing we'd like to look at is, I know as you look at different uses for Title I monies, having sat on the REF Grants Committee, I know some of our monies do go to support programs that have provided support for students who have been identified as being at risk, as well as others who are not achieving. So I would hope that maybe some of the title money could be supplanting what the REF is currently doing, which previously we had to do because there were no other sources of funding. Because I think, as you know, funds are always finite. And also, the thing that I thought I needed to say to Lydia as to why we may need that extra administrator, that based on my experience, having administrators be at IEP meetings is very important. And many times in a school, there may be 2 or 3 IEP meetings going at once. And if you're trying to be accountable to a federal agency, it's important that an administrator is there who knows the rules and doesn't overpromise or underpromise based on what the perceived needs of the students are. And probably Andrea can speak to that better than I can. Is that not true, Andrea? We need to have administrators at those IEP meetings. And instructional support teachers did not have that clout that they needed to put that name on the bottom line. And so sometimes administrators sign things without full knowledge of what happened at the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, our next meeting will be on March 17th at 5 o'clock in this same location.